Assalamu alaikum dear students. I am Dr. Rabia Yaqoob, an assistant professor of zoology at University of Education, and I am the course instructor of applied ecology. This is the second lecture of applied ecology. In the first lecture, I have tried to give you an overview of ecology, its a brief background, as well as I have discussed about the energy and the laws of thermodynamics which are governing the ecosystems. In this lecture, you will study about the different functions of ecosystem. I will talk about the primary and secondary productions of ecosystem. I will also discuss about the trophic levels and the energy variation with the increasing trophic levels, and how energy flows within food chains and food webs. When we consider the function of an ecosystem, we discuss the flow of energy and the cycling of nutrient. That is how the sunlight is trapped by the plants in a year, how much plant material is eaten by herbivores, and how many herbivores are eaten by the carnivores. Actually, in ecosystem, the energy flows in non-cyclic manner in a unidirectional way from the sun to the decomposers, via producers and micro consumers, while the minerals and other nutrients, they keep on moving in a cyclic manner in the ecosystem. If we talk about the productivity of an ecosystem, it refers to the rate of production, which is the amount of organic matter which is accumulated in any unit time at any specific area. There are different types of productivity: primary productivity, secondary productivity, or net productivity. Primary productivity can be defined as the rate at which radiant energy is stored by the photosynthetic and chemosynthetic activity of producers. Secondary productivity is the rate of energy storage at consumer level, for example by the herbivores or the carnivores and the decomposers. And net productivity can be defined as the rate of storage of organic matter not used by the heterotrophs or the consumer. It is equivalent to the net primary production minus consumption by the heterotrophs during a specific time period, for example a season or a year. Primary productivity is of two types: gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. Net primary productivity refers to the total rate of photosynthesis, including the organic matter used up in the respiration during the measurement period. Gross primary productivity depends on the chlorophyll content. The rate of primary productivity can be estimated in terms of either chlorophyll content as the chlorophyll per gram dry weight per unit area, or it can also be determined as the photosynthetic number, that is the amount of carbon dioxide fixed by the per gram of chlorophyll per hour. On the other hand, net primary productivity is the rate of storage of organic matter in the plant tissue in excess of respiratory utilization by plants during the measurement period. There are different methods to measure the primary productivity. We can measure the primary productivity of any ecosystem by harvest method, oxygen measurement method, carbon dioxide measurement method, or the pH method, radioisotope method, or the chlorophyll estimation method. Secondary productivity, that is the rate of energy storage at consumer level by the herbivores, carnivores and the decomposers. Actually consumers utilize already produced food material in their respiration and also convert the food matter of different tissue by an overall process. So the secondary productivity is not divided into gross and net amounts. Due to this fact, some ecologists such as Odom prefer to use the term assimilation rather than the production at this level, the consumer level. Secondary productivity in fact remains mobile. It keeps on moving from one organism to another and does not live in situ like the primary productivity, which is stored in the plant biomass. In an ecosystem, we can observe the transfer or flow of energy from one trophic level to another trophic level in a successive way. Trophic level, it can be defined as the number of links by which an organism is separated from the producer, or in other words, we can say that it is the position of an organism in the food chain. Now, what food chain is? The pattern of eating and being eaten, it forms a linear chain-like arrangement, and that arrangement is known as food chain. Usually food chains are started from any kind of producer. For example, in this figure you can say, here you can see that a food chain is shown in this figure. It starts with a plant. That plant is eaten by a herbivorous animal. This herbivorous animal is eaten by a carnivorous reptile, and that reptile is ultimately eaten by a predatory bird. So this you can see this is a linear arrangement of the pattern of eating and being eaten, and it is started with a producer. In ecosystems, the producer trap radiant energy of sun and transfer that energy to the chemical or potential energy. That chemical or potential energy, it could be stored in the form of organic substances such as carbohydrates, proteins and fats. When a herbivorous animal eat a plant, or when bacteria decompose it, these organic compounds are oxidized and energy is liberated. The amount of energy is just equal to the amount of energy that was used in the synthesizing that substance. This phenomena, or this process, it fulfills the first law of thermodynamics. Do you remember the first law of thermodynamics? First law of thermodynamics, it states that energy cannot be destroyed, nor it can be created, but energy can be transformed from one form of energy to another form. During this process, when energy is transferred from one trophic level to another, sometime energy is converted into heat, and that is no more useful for other organism. This situation, it fulfills the second law of thermodynamics. If the animal which has eaten up the plant material, it is eaten by another animal, and in this way the energy is transferred from the herbivorous animal to the carnivorous animal, and there is a decrease in useful energy when it is transferred from one animal to another animal. Such type of transfer of energy from organism to organism, it sustains the ecosystem. And when energy is transferred from one individual to another individual, in a particular community, such as pond or a lake or a river, we come across the different kind of food chains. Have you ever observed that the number of steps in a food chain are always restricted or limited? Could anybody guess that why these steps are confined to 5 or 4 steps only? I have discussed in the previous lecture number 1 of applied ecology, that when energy is transferred from one organism to another organism, or from one trophic level to another trophic level, there is a decrease in the amount of energy, or the amount of useful energy from one trophic level to another trophic level. The major portion of the energy, it is dissipated, or it is used into the maintenance activities, and it is no more available for the use of another organism. Let's say, for example, in simple food chains, out of 1000 calories of energy that are reaching to a producer, only 10 calories, or the 1% of the energy, is stored by the plant, and it is available to the next trophic level. The remaining amount of energy, about 99% of energy, it is lost to the environment for the plant's own maintenance. Of the 10 calories which are available to the herbivores, 9 calories or the 99% of the energy is again lost to its level, and only 1 calorie is passed to the carnivores level. So, in this way, at each trophic level in the food chain, a large portion of energy is used for its own maintenance and ultimately lost as heat. Consequently, organisms in each trophic level pass on less and less energy than they receive. This limits the number of steps or trophic levels to 4 or 5 in food chain. The longer the food chain, the less is the energy available to the final member. In nature, basically, there are two types of food chains that can be observed: grazing food chain and detritus food chain. Grazing food chain, this type of food chain, it starts from the living green plants and it goes to the grazing herbivores and on to the carnivores. Ecosystem with such type of food chains are directly dependent on the influx of solar radiation. This type of food chain depends on autotrophic energy that is captured and the movement of this energy to the herbivores. Most of the ecosystem in nature follow this type of food chain. This food chain is very significant from energy standpoint. Here in the figure below, you can see a grazing food chain. This food chain starts with a plant, a producer. This plant is eaten up by a herbivorous larvae of an insect. This larvae is eaten up by an insectivorous bird, and that bird is ultimately eaten up by a predatory bird. You can see that this grazing food chain or herbivorous food chain, it is converted. Detritus food chain, it starts with the organic wastes, exudates, and the dead matter which is derived from the grazing food chain, and that waste is known as detritus. The energy contained in this detritus is not lost to the ecosystem as a whole. Rather, it serves as a source of energy for a group of organisms that are known as detritivores, and these organisms are separated from the grazing food chain. That food chain is generally termed as the detritus food chain. The detritus food chain represents an exceedingly important component of the energy flow of the ecosystem. Indeed, in some ecosystem, considerably more energy flows through the detritus food chain than that of grazing food chain. In the detritus food chain, the energy flow remains as a continuous passage rather than a stepwise flow between the discrete entities that happens in grazing food chain. There are many organisms which forms the detritus food chain. They may include algae, bacteria, slime molds, actinomycetes, and other kind of fungi. They also includes protozoans, insects, mites, crustaceans, and so on. Some of them are highly specific in their food requirements, and some eat almost everything. We can say some are specialists and some are journalists. If we compare the grazing food chain and detritus food chain in terms of storage of energy, in contrast to grazing food chain in which energy storage is entirely within the tissue of living organism, energy storage in detritus food chain, it may be largely external to the organism, which is in the detritus itself. In this figure, you can see a very simple detritivorous food chain which starts with the dead leaves which are eaten by an insect, that is wood louse, and wood louse in turn is eaten by a bird that is an insectivorous bird. In nature, simple food chains occurs rarely. The same organism it serves at a different trophic level in the same ecosystem. For example, it may derive its food from more than one source. Even the same organism may be eaten up by the several organisms of a high trophic level, or an organism may feed upon several different organisms of the low trophic level. Usually, the kind of food changes with the age of organism and the food availability. So, in a given ecosystem, various food chains are linked together and intersect each other to form a complex network that is known as food web. The complexity of food web can vary greatly depending upon the number of connections a species or an organism have with different trophic levels, and we express this complexity by a mean that is known as connectance of the food web. It can be calculated by dividing the actual number of interspecific interactions divided by the potential number of interspecific interactions. Generally, food webs are not too complex. As more and more species are involved in the food web, the connectance falls. Except in insect communities, omnivores are scarce, and when they occur, they usually feed on species in adjacent trophic levels. Within habitats, food webs are rarely broken into the discrete compartments, and the number of species of predator in a food web typically exceeds the number of species of prey. Food chains and food webs are equally significant in different ecosystems. The food chains and food web studies help us to understand the feeding relationship and the interaction between organisms in an ecosystem. They also help us to appreciate the energy flow mechanism and matter circulation in ecosystem, and understand the movement of toxic substances in the ecosystem. They also help us to study the problems which are generated by the biological magnification. Before going to next topic, I would like you to draw a food chain or food web that ends up to you. Means you as a human should be present at the apex as a consumer. Food chains and food webs are simply the trophic relationship of different organisms, and if we represent that trophic relationships in a graphical form, that graphical representation of trophic relationships, that is known as ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids are also known as Eltonian pyramids due to the person who have first described these graphical representation of trophic relationships. Charles Elton in 1927 first time discussed these ecological pyramids. In the successive steps of grazing food chains, photosynthetic autotrophs, herbivorous heterotrophs, carnivorous heterotrophs, or decay bacteria, the number and mass of organisms in the each step is limited by the amount of energy available. Since some energy is lost as a heat, in each transformation the step becomes progressively smaller near the top. Graphical representation of this relationship, it appears like a pyramid shape. That's why these are known as the ecological pyramids. The ecological pyramids represents the trophic structure and also trophic function of the ecosystem. In many ecological pyramids, the producers form the base and the successive trophic levels make the apex of that pyramid. In communities which are present in terrestrial ecosystem or the shallow water ecosystem, they contains gradually sloping ecological pyramids. That means that such pyramids, they have a broader base and the narrower tips. Because these producers remain large and characterized by the accumulation of organic matter. However, this trend does not hold for all the ecosystem. For example, in aquatic ecosystems such as lakes and open sea, primary production is confined to microscopic algae. The algae have a short life cycle, it multiply rapidly, it accumulate little organic matter and are heavily exploited by the herbivorous zooplanktons. At any point or at any specific time, the standing crop, the quantity or amount of standing crop is low. As a result, if we draw the pyramid of such food chains or food webs, the pyramid of biomass for these aquatic ecosystem is inverted. It means they have narrower bases and broader tips. In the figure below, you can see the two different kinds of ecological pyramids. These pyramids are the pyramids of biomass. It means that in these pyramids we have represented the biomass of organisms which are present at different trophic level. At the left side, that pyramid is the pyramid of trophic interactions of terrestrial ecosystem, and at the right side it is the pyramid which represents the trophic relationship of in an aquatic ecosystem. You can see here in the terrestrial ecosystem the number of producer or biomass of producer is huge, that is about 1000 kilogram. Out of 1000 kilograms of producers which are eaten up by the herbivores, they can convert only or they can convey only 100 kilograms of biomass to the primary carnivorous level, and in turn only 10 kilogram biomass is transferred to the top carnivorous or the secondary carnivorous level. In the aquatic ecosystem, the number of producer or biomass of producer at a specific time, it is low because these are the microscopic organisms and they divide rapidly. These microscopic organisms, they are eaten up by a large sized herbivores, and these herbivores in return are eaten up by the more large sized carnivores. So if we measure their biomass at a specific time, the total biomass of producer is less than the herbivores, and which in turn is less than the total biomass of the carnivores. We can represent different kind of informations or different kind of details via these ecological pyramids. We can draw pyramids of number where the number of individual organisms at different trophic level of food chain can be presented. We can also draw pyramids of biomass where the biomass of members of food chain present at any time can be represented. And we can also draw the pyramids of number where the amount of energy that flows from one trophic level to another trophic level can be represented. In this figure, you can say three different kinds of pyramids. First one is pyramid of number. At the base of this pyramid, number of producers at a specific time in a specific area are represented. They are the producers. At the second step, you can see the number of herbivores in that ecosystem. At the third step, carnivores of first level, or you can say the primary secondary consumers are present at the third step. At the fourth step, tertiary consumers are present that are carnivores of level 2. At the same time, in the second pyramid, you can say the amount of biomass at different trophic levels. At the base, the biomass of producer is presented, and at the second, third and fourth step, the biomass of herbivores, carnivores of level 1 and carnivores of level 2 are represented here. And at the same time, in the third pyramid, you can see the amount of energy that is incorporated at different trophic level. It is represented in that pyramid. If we talk about the pyramids of number, as I have already told you that it depicts the number of individual organisms at different trophic level of food chain. This pyramid was first of all introduced by the Charles Elton, who pointed out the great difference in the number of organisms involved in each step of food chain. The animals at the lower end or at the base of pyramid of the chain are most abundant. Successive links of carnivores decrease rapidly in number until there are very few carnivores at the top. The pyramid of number ignores the biomass of organism and it also does not indicates the energy transferred or the use of energy by the group of individuals which are involved. The shape of pyramids of number it could be different in different ecosystem. For example, in pond ecosystem we can say a typical pyramid shape of this Eltonian pyramid where the primary producers are more abundant as compared to the primary consumers. These primary consumers are more abundant in comparison to the secondary consumers, and so on. On the other hand, in the parasitic food chain, we can observe an inverted pyramid of number. For example, which starts with a single oak tree that is inhabited by many birds, and each bird is further inhabited by different kind of parasites like lices and bugs, and there is a possibility that each louse or each bug that could be inhabited by many hyperparasites. The third type of pyramid of number that is possible is a spindle shaped pyramid. For example, in a tree ecosystem which starts with a single tree that is inhabited by different kind of herbivores like birds, different grazers, and that these grazers they are in turn eaten up by the few number of carnivores, for example wolves, and these wolves are consumed by further less number of top carnivores or the tertiary consumers. The biomass of the members of food chain present at any one time forms the pyramid of biomass. Pyramid of biomass indicate decrease of biomass in each trophic level from base to the apex. For example, the total biomass of the producer ingested by the herbivores is more than the total biomass of the herbivores in an ecosystem. Likewise, the total mass of the primary carnivores or secondary consumer will be less than the herbivores, and so on. When we draw a pyramid of biomass, we obtain two different type of pyramids. For example, in forest ecosystem, usually we get an upright kind of pyramids where the biomass of producer is huge as compared to the biomass of herbivores and carnivores. While in the case of pond ecosystem, we get an inverted shaped pyramids where the biomass of producers is less as compared to the biomass of herbivores and carnivores and secondary carnivores. When production is considered in terms of energy, the pyramid indicates not only the amount of energy flow at each level, but more important, the actual role the various organisms play in the transfer of energy. The base upon which the pyramid of energy is constructed is the quantity of organism produced per unit time, or in other words, the rate at which food material passes through the food chain. Some organisms may have a small biomass, but the total energy they assimilate and pass on may be considerably greater than that of organism with a much larger biomass. Energy pyramids are always upright or sloping because less energy is transferred from each level than was paid into it. In case such an open water communities, the producer have less bulk than consumer, but the energy they stored and pass on must be greater than that of the next level. Otherwise, the biomass that producers support could not be greater than the producers themselves. This high energy flow is maintained by the rapid turnover of individual planktons rather than an increase of total biomass.